Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 801, and today is May 20th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A little bit of a different schedule for Conflicts of Interest this week. Going to be doing shows on Tuesday and Thursday rather than Wednesday and Friday. Just got some things going on at home, and that's going to be what's easiest here. So, of course, they're on YouTube, so you can watch them whenever you want. Rumble, Odysee, anywhere you listen to podcasts. So plenty of places to catch the show. If you want to listen to them on Wednesday and Friday, you definitely can. But they will be published on Tuesday and Thursday this week. This schedule for the Kyle Anzalone show is unchanged. I will have a new episode Wednesday, 4:45 Eastern time that will stream live to my Eds channel at Kyle Anzalone _, also Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. So lots of ways to watch all the different shows that I do. And of course, we have plenty to cover, so I'm jumping right into it here. First up, Trump's $500 billion Golden Dome missile shield. So this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. President Trump's plan to develop a new massive missile defense system for the U.S., dubbed the Golden Dome, or the Iron Dome for America, is expected to cost $500 billion over the next 20 years, CNN reported on Monday. Remember when Trump was supposed to be cutting the U.S. government budget? Apparently that is no longer a thing. So the CNN report said representatives from SpaceX, Palantir, and Anduril have all pitched Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on their plans for the project. A source told the media outlet that he wants what they are selling. And of course, it's important to note here that this is the same kind of corruption that we've seen in all administrations. One of the reasons that Trump initially caught fire in 2016 is that everybody knew the politicians were bought off. Particularly WikiLeaks had done something really important. And people knew about the George W. Bush era and how his wars in Iraq and Afghanistan helped the military-industrial complex. But it was also proven during the Obama era as well. Particularly some emails released by WikiLeaks showed that, major, I believe it was Citigroup, essentially picked Barack Obama's cabinet for him. And so our politicians are bought and paid for, and everybody knows that. And in fact, in 2016, Trump was saying on the campaign trail, in the debates, like, all these people around me, they're all for sale. Do you know how I know? I've bought them. I've given them donations to get what I want from these people. I know how politicians work. And I think that's what attracted a lot of people to Donald Trump. Not necessarily that he was like somebody on the up and up, somebody that wouldn't engage in this kind of behavior, but rather he was going to be somebody that was so rich and so honest in the, just kind of blatant about what he was doing, that we wouldn't have that kind of pay for play access in the Trump administrations. Now, obviously that's happening here because, these are the particular billionaires and companies that are very close to Donald Trump that seem to be getting in on this latest boondoggle. So Pentagon officials have submitted plans to Trump for several options on developing missile shields, and the president is expected to announce his preferred plan soon. The Pentagon said the Secretary of Defense and other department leaders have engaged with the president to present options and look forward to announcing a path forward in the coming days. The idea of the Golden Dome is to provide a missile shield for the entire territory of the United States that can intercept most advanced missiles in the world. Trump's executive order directed the Pentagon to pursue the plan specified that it must include space-based interceptors. And so, of course, the $500 billion price tag for this, I'm sure, is maybe a quarter of what if that is half the price of what the Pentagon actually pays. So if it ends up being $1 trillion, I would consider that to be an amazing achievement, that the Pentagon was able to develop a new interceptor for less than $1 trillion. I think the price tag is going to be up and around $2 trillion, and the only way that it costs less is if it doesn't ever get completed. So I'm not very optimistic that this is going to work. Weaponizing space is also going to have massive consequences and is going to be very problematic. And so going down that path is going to induce other countries to not only develop their own space-based weaponry and interceptors, but also ground-based weaponry that could hit the US interceptors that are based in space, right? So there's going to be just a whole new kind of arms race opening up here to for the price you pay. Missile defense is incredibly expensive, and the missiles, I feel like, are easier to develop ways to miss the interceptors versus interceptors to hit the new kinds of missiles. And the offensive capabilities there are far more just better than the defensive capabilities. And so there's a lot going on here. This is going to have some major impacts on the U.S. and our relationship with Russia, China, and other major countries around the world. And of course, it's going to cost a massive amount of money to the U.S. taxpayer. Next up here on the war in Ukraine. After a call with Putin, Trump says Russia-Ukraine ceasefire talks will begin immediately. So President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday and said the call went well and that Russia and Ukraine would immediately begin negotiations on a ceasefire. So Trump wrote on Truth Social, "Just completed my 2-hour call with Russian President Vladimir Putin of Russia. I believe it went very well. Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations towards a ceasefire and, more importantly, an end to the war." Putin told reporters after the call that Moscow was ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum for a potential future peace treaty. The Russian leader said the memorandum could outline a number of positions, such as, for instance, settlement principles, the timing for signing a potential peace agreement, and so on, including a potential ceasefire for a certain period. Trump also spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky and informed several European leaders of the plans for Russia and Ukraine to begin ceasefire negotiations. He noted the new Pope, Leo XIV, has offered the Vatican as a potential venue for the talks. The Trump-Putin call came just a few days after the Russian and Ukrainian officials held talks in Istanbul. During the talks, the two sides agreed to a prisoner swap, but it didn't appear any progress was made towards a ceasefire. Russia and Ukraine remain very far apart on their conditions for ending the war. Putin wants Ukraine to recognize 4 Ukrainian oblasts that Moscow annexed in 2022 as part of Russia, which will require Ukrainian forces to withdraw from territory it holds in those regions. And Zelensky has repeatedly stated he will not cede any territory, including, look, it seems to me to be a reasonable demand for Zelensky to make. I'm not saying that Putin or the Russians have to agree to this or how that's all going to work out, but it would seem to be a reasonable demand to say that territory that our troops are still on, we are going to keep. But that's not Zelensky's demand. His demand is that we want all territory of Ukraine that was from the 1991. So this includes the Crimean Peninsula, which has been a part of Russia for a better part of a decade. It includes the Donbass republics that, again, have been under, at least to some degree, Russian control. Even if they were autonomous regions of Ukraine for a while, Moscow start issuing passports in the Donbass and things like that because the Ukrainian state wouldn't. And I think they were giving out the welfare checks and things like that. For a lot of, government functions, those have been provided to those people for quite some time. And so the idea of Ukraine taking back these territories that are firmly under the Kremlin's control at this point is completely unrealistic. And so Zelensky's demands are there as well. Now, as far as Russia's demands to have all those annexed regions under their control, I would hope that Putin is willing to negotiate on this point. I think it's probably necessary to some degree to at least be flexible on this point. Now, look, there may be towns and areas where the Ukrainians are going to have to withdraw and pull back a little bit, right? Where they're going to have to cede some territory to Moscow to make the region, the borders, make a little bit more sense, maybe straighten out the borders and things like that. This seems like, reasonable that the Ukrainians could be expected to move back a little bit, particularly as the Russians do have the upper hand in the war. And if Russia is willing to pay the price, which, is going to come at the lives of thousands, if not tens of thousands of their soldiers and hundreds of billions, if not trillions of their dollars in order to take this territory, they certainly have the ability to do that. at this point in time. So I don't think Russia is going to not accept any Ukrainian pullback. Now, the other thing, and I have to say this, I've said it time and time again, I think it's so important to constantly bring up. Washington does have a lot that we could offer to Moscow in hopes that they will ease up on their conditions on Ukraine, maybe even give back some territory, who knows. But recognizing Crimea as Russian territory, not challenging those, like by sailing British warships just a few miles off the Crimean Peninsula, not conducting war games right on the Russian border, not flying our nuclear bombers towards the Russian border, removing the Aegis Ashore missile defense system from Poland and Romania. You know, there are different missile defense systems the U.S. could use in those countries, like our THAAD, our Patriot batteries, but the Aegis Ashore is particularly provocative because the launcher used for those interceptors can also hold Tomahawk missiles. And so being in Poland and Romania, you now have the Kremlin within range of missiles that could potentially carry a nuclear weapon. And that's a major, and I think a fair concern of Russia to have. And so if the West is willing to say close the door on NATO expansion, particularly to Ukraine, make some concessions on forced deployments when it comes to Eastern Europe, war games in Eastern Europe, and particularly missile and missile defense deployments in Eastern and Central Europe, I think there could probably be a lot that the West could offer to Putin that may make him say, you know, this is actually far more important to me than Kherson or Zaporizhia or other Ukrainian territories. And so we will see how this progresses. My guess is that these two sides just aren't close enough together at this point, and it's going to have to basically be something that takes a little bit more time until my guess is that the Ukrainians are desperate enough to make a deal. Now, I think the Russians probably need to get a little bit more desperate for a deal too, which, you know, is going to happen as their country continues to bleed, actually lose their young men and then bleed, financially as well from all the money they're spending on this war. I'm sure that would incentivize Putin to eventually engage in more talks. But I do think that as Russia is taking territory right now at the pace that I believe they want to take territory, there's now a whole lot of pressure on Putin to agree to a deal. Next up here, moving over to the Middle East. This story I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on May 19th. UK, France, Canada say suffering in Gaza is intolerable and threatened to sanction Israel. So 3 major Western governments issued a statement condemning the Israeli-created starvation in Gaza and settlement expansion in the West Bank. The UK, France, and Canada said they are considering sanctions on Israel in response to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So the statement said, "We strongly oppose the expansion of the Israeli military operations in Gaza. The level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable. We call on the government of Israel to stop its military operations in Gaza and immediately allow humanitarian aid to enter the Strip." The statement was released following the announcement from Tel Aviv that a basic amount of food aid will be allowed to enter the Strip. The 3 countries called the Israeli plan wholly inadequate. And from reports that I read yesterday, only 5 aid trucks were able to enter Gaza, and at least 2 of those aid trucks were carrying burial shrouds and not even essentially carrying food, right? And so imagine if you have a starving population, their children are dying, and they desperately need food. And I believe one of the trucks was carrying in some kind of formula or baby food, and so there was some food that got in. But if 40% of the aid that Israel allowed in the first day were essentially trucks carrying coffins, I think people would understand the message that Tel Aviv is trying to send to the Palestinians. So the statement from those 3 countries said, yesterday's announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food aid into Gaza is wholly inadequate. This must include engaging with the UN to ensure the delivery of aid in line with humanitarian principles. The countries threatened to take action against Tel Aviv if more aid was not allowed into Gaza, and Israel kept expanding its settlements in the West Bank. We will not stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response. We oppose any attempt to expand settlements in the West Bank. Israel must halt settlements which are illegal and illegal and undermine the viability of a Palestinian state and the security of both Israelis and Palestinians. We will not hesitate to take further action, including targeted sanctions. London, Paris, and Ottawa also condemned Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack on Israel and demanded the group release the Israeli hostages. The IDF has recently expanded its military operations in Gaza. Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have explained that Tel Aviv's policy is to make the strip so unlivable that Palestinians will leave for another country. The three-way statement said that the policy would be a war crime, explaining, "We condemn the abhorrent language used by members of the Israeli government, threatening that in their despair at the destruction of Gaza, civilians will start to relocate. Permanent forced displacement is a breach of international humanitarian law." And I note in my article that multiple international human rights groups have labeled the Israeli operations in Gaza as a genocide. Tel Aviv has imposed a full blockade on all aid entering Gaza, leading to widespread starvation in the strip. And again, 3 trucks got in. There's 1 point something, maybe 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. So I don't know if you could imagine, right? Like you got a Walmart that's empty and they have 3 trucks of food come in and 2 million people try to go to that Walmart to buy food. You got to imagine that after the first few thousand people, nobody's getting anything at all. So last week, and one of the interesting parts of this is I'm guessing this is going to get a pretty stiff reaction from Tel Aviv, because last week, French President Emmanuel Macron said that the European Union could cancel trade agreements with Israel because of the brutal treatment of Palestinians. Netanyahu lashed out at Macron in response, accusing him of blood libel. Macron has once again chosen to side with the murderous Islamist terrorist organization and echo its despicable propaganda, accusing Israel of blood libels, a statement from his office said. And of course, these statements are weak and not enough action is being done by many of these countries. Most prominently, of course, the United States of America, which provides Israel with most of what it needs to conduct this genocide. So, there have been some reports that, Trump and Netanyahu are at each other's throats, that this is going to lead to a real change in the U.S. policy when it comes to the Middle East, and this just doesn't seem to be the case. This article here from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, U.S. official denies threat to abandon Israel over Gaza. A U.S. official speaking with the Times of Israel has denied a report that the Trump administration officials have threatened to abandon Israel if it refuses to end its assault on the Gaza Strip. The official was responding to a report from the Washington Post that cited a person familiar with discussions between the U.S. and Israel. Trump's people are letting Israel know, "We will abandon you if you do not end this war," a source told the Post. A U.S. official speaking with the Times said there may be disagreements, but the idea that we would abandon Israel is preposterous. Also on Monday, Axios reported that Vice President J.D. Vance canceled a planned trip to Israel because he didn't want to suggest the Trump administration endorse Israel's decision to launch a massive escalation in Gaza, which led to the slaughter of hundreds of Palestinians in recent days. Vance denied the report, insisting his trip was canceled for logistical reasons. Now, that's the part of this story which rings a little bit more true to me, that Vance will maybe cancel his trip if they asked Israel not to go forward with this military operation and they did anyway. The part that doesn't make any sense is saying that the U.S. would cut off Israel. I don't see Trump going down that path. So there has also been a series of media reports about friction between Trump and Netanyahu, but there is no indication that the administration is willing to leverage military aid to force Netanyahu into a permanent agreement or ceasefire deal in Gaza. And this was the case during the Biden administration. Remember, we had time and time again, Biden and Netanyahu are mad at each other. They're not getting along. And then he would agree to send Netanyahu all of the weapons that he would ever need. And so, it was just clearly not true. All right. So on that aid, on that basic amount of aid, this is Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's take. He said on Monday that allowing a minimal amount of aid into Gaza will ensure Israel has continued support from its friends to continue its goal of destroying the Palestinian territory. So Smotrich's comments came after more than 70 days of Israeli total blockade on Gaza, and a day after the Israeli Prime Minister said Israel will allow a basic amount of food to enter the territory. And the 5 aid trucks reportedly entered Gaza on Monday, the first truck since March 2nd. Smotrich said allowing a minuscule amount of aid to enter Gaza, as I explained before, this is completely insignificant, will allow for our friends in the world to continue to provide us with international umbrella of protection against the Security Council and the Hague Tribunal for us to continue this fight, God willing, until victory. Netanyahu made similar comments on Monday, saying allowing minimal aid into Gaza was about maintaining support from the U.S. Our best friends in the world, senators I know as strong supporters of Israel, have warned that they cannot continue to support us if images of mass starvation emerge. We must avoid famine, both for practical reasons and diplomatic ones. Without international backing, we won't be able to complete the mission of victory. And my guess is that they're also going to distribute this aid in a way that coalesces the Palestinian people into a certain couple pockets of area where they could then very easily drive them out of the strip altogether. And this is something that the Israelis have even floated. So Smolcher said Monday that in the coming days, a small amount of supplies will be delivered to bakeries that distribute pitas to people and public kitchens that provide a daily ration of cooked food. Civilians will receive a pita and a plate of food. That is it. Smoltrich praised the Israeli military's new offensive, dubbed Gideon Chariot, saying the IDF was now destroying what's left of the strip simply because everything there is one big city of terror. He said that once the civilian population is forced into southern Gaza, they will be expelled from the Gaza as a part of Trump's plan. And Trump has talked about turning Gaza into a freedom zone. And if that was a freedom zone for the Palestinians, that could be a good thing. But Trump's freedom zone is either a U.S. controlled, an internationally controlled, or an Israeli controlled freedom zone for Gaza, which means it will be the site of a genocide that there once was Palestinian territory. So this is, I think, very problematic what's going on here, and just utterly disgusting that we're leveraging aid in this way. Okay, next up, this one from Dave DeCamp, just breaking down what's happened over the last 24 hours in Gaza. Gaza's health ministry on Monday said that at least 125 Palestinians were killed and 364 were wounded over the previous 24-hour period as the Israeli military expands its operations in the Strip. The health ministry said that the bodies of 11 Palestinians who were killed in previous Israeli attacks were also recovered. Heavy Israeli strikes hit the southern city of Khan Yunis after the Israeli military ordered the evacuation of the area, threatening an unprecedented attack was coming. The Israeli Defense Forces will launch an unprecedented attack to destroy the capabilities of the terrorist organizations in the area. I also read an article in 972 magazine, which is the Tel Aviv-based Israeli outlet. One of the founders of the outlet is the director of No Other Land, the Oscar Wayne documentary. And what they go through in this article, and they interview a bunch of Israeli IDF soldiers to explain, is that they're just flattening everything. The entire city of Rafah has been flattened. They're destroying every home. Thousands every single day are being destroyed by the Israelis. This is an absolute genocide, absolutely intolerable. So, a story on Lebanon before we wrap up here. Israeli drone strikes kill 1, wound 2 in southern Lebanon. So, Israel's campaign of attacks against southern Lebanon continued on Monday, with drone strikes hitting multiple locations and killing 1 person, while wounding at least 2 others. The deadly strikes took place against the border village of Hula, killing a man standing in front of his home. The IDF later issued a statement claiming that the person slain was a member of Hezbollah. The Radawin Force is Hezbollah's special forces unit, and is relatively common for Israel to proclaim the people they slain in Lebanon as members. As is often the case, however, there is no evidence to make that clear. And last up here, moving over to Syria. 5 killed in East Syrian car bombing, ISIS suspected as conflict escalates. So attentions are focused on the Al Mayadeen district of Syria's Deir al-Zor governance today after a late Monday suicide car bombing against a local police station killed 5 people and wounded a number of others. Syrian state media reported that 3 security officers were killed and several wounded in the car bombing. There has been no claim of credit yet, but ISIS is believed to be the culprit. As one official noted, it's no secret ISIS has a cell in the area. Earlier Tuesday, the General Security Forces launched a large-scale campaign in and around the city. They reported that at least 12 ISIS suspects, along with 2 Iranian militants, were captured so far in the ongoing operation. They also reported an unnamed person described as a top ISIS cell leader captured elsewhere in the countryside in Deir al-Zor. Anti-ISIS operations have been scaling off across the country in recent days, including raids against Aleppo that led to the death of 3 ISIS members. ISIS is known to have a substantial presence in eastern Syria, where they've often clashed with the Kurdish SDF and backing U.S. forces. As the Islamist HTS government tries to gain control over the country, however, it's increasingly an Islamist versus Islamist fight. And we've seen this throughout the war in Syria, where there was a real split between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, between Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, now the president of Syria, and al-Baghdadi, the then leader of ISIS, who was, of course, killed by a U.S. raid in the first Trump administration. And so, this isn't uncommon to see, and it's no suggestion that Jolani is any less of a terrorist than he ever was. This is him just consolidating control. All right, everybody, that'll do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And remember, subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show. The YouTube is the first link in the show notes page. And I will be have a new interview tomorrow at 4:45 Eastern Time. Hopefully you can tune in live. Thanks, everyone.